I'm not going to do the kind of cheating stuff that people have done beforehand about introducing my pecha kucha. Just before I start, I'm going to say this, this and this, or I'm going to talk over. I'm going to press the button and start. Is that okay? And you're going to time it, yeah? Right, okay. This paper reports on a long-term project exploring female employment in 19th century swimming. It collates my work on attendants, teachers and notationists and questions the notion that gendered separate spheres were a universal phenomenon. Separate spheres relates to a compartmentalised view of gender. While it postulates a dichotomy between the feminine home and the male workplace, it has come under critical scrutiny from those who argue that sphere boundaries were full of fissures. It was never the case, for example, that women gave up work when they married, as can be seen from 1887 work patterns, although some believed that this lowered men's wages and degraded women. What was applied to the workplace was also applied to women's leisure. Sea bathing, a popular Victorian activity, was dominated by a spatial separation of the sexes and an insistence on female instructors or bathers. This became even more entrenched when women's swimming moved indoors into the new corporation baths. While an earlier act stimulated the creation of baths, it was the 1878 Baths and Washhouses Act that encouraged local authorities to build covered swimming facilities, leading to a shift in location for many female instructors. This is reflected in census returns, which show a decline in the number of female bathers and a parallel increase in swimming mistresses. Teachers were not the only women, however, who were employed at the baths, which normally had ancillary washing facilities. Baths like those at Newington, for example, had a designated area or time for women swimming, and a laundry room which provided for a local population that had little access to suitable facilities for washing clothes or personal hygiene. Even before 1878, this range of facilities meant that different categories of staff were required, ranging from the superintendent and matron to stokers and engineers, bath attendants, and support staff such as ticket clerks and laundry women. The following data has been collated from census returns on nearly 1,800 women gathered by my colleague Margaret Roberts. The headline figures in Table 2 illustrate the increase in numbers finding employment in all categories at the baths after 1878. Some significant differences between employment categories are revealed, such as the marital status of ticket clerks, who were invariably single or widowed, and of matrons, most of whom were married. This is emphasised in this sample, which shows that matrons were invariably engaged as part of a couple, with their husbands acting as bath superintendents or managers. The data also suggests that they had some longevity in their roles when compared to the clerks. Adverts for staff indicate that bath attendants were essential. The highlighted areas on these examples require the ability to swim and give some idea of wages, as well as the type of individual who might be engaged, given the need to be able to write. Following 1878, there was a steady increase in the number of bath attendants, 3/4 of whom were single. Increasingly, there was less reliance on family connections to obtain positions, suggesting that these positions became available to a wider female constituency. These women were generally recruited from the more skilled or reliable sections of the working class, such as carpenters or engineers. They also tended to remain in post for at least 2 censuses, suggesting a certain level of job security. As facilities expanded, more women took up swimming, ranging from aristocratic women at the Bath Club to the working class members of the Women's Union. This increased the demand for female professional swimming teachers such as Miss Young. Now, some individuals, like Nellie Easton, became prominent within the swimming community, and she featured in a number of reports of the period, not only with respect to the quality of her teaching, but also in her giving of swimming entertainments. The leading figures in swimming entertainments, of course, were professional natationists such as Laura Sageman, Agnes Beckwith, and Alice Sinclair, who also used their reputations to attract women to their popular and lucrative teaching classes at the baths. Most natationists had family connections with swimming, and this was true of many swimming teachers, as Table 7 shows. By keeping swim teaching in the family, the head of the household ensured that the income from classes was retained. For those who entered teaching from outside of the swimming community, their generally artisan class backgrounds suggest that they were slightly further up the social hierarchy than bath attendants. Like many natationists, they often remained in this role for many years. For me, these lives reflect fissures in the boundaries surrounding separate spheres, with many women, for example, continuing to work after marriage. The data is constantly expanding, and future research will examine specific baths communities to further explore female employment in baths.
Oh, you're going to be so smart.
You've been practicing it for weeks.
No, I haven't. Just a couple of run-throughs, that's all.
Do we have any questions today? We have got a little bit of time because he kept to time, so we want to give any.
Maybe now's the time just to expand on it a little bit. No.
Are there any regional differences in women and employment?
I think I've said that's a data of about 1800 that underpinned that particular presentation, but certainly with the work that Margaret's done in trawling through the censuses over the last 2 to 3 months, on top of that, I would imagine it's now reached a point where it's probably about double, so it's about 3,500. What we need to do is to start breaking it down and looking at whether there are regional differences. But the key focus of the next bit of work is to actually identify particular baths in particular areas. And one of the reasons why I want to talk to Sylvia as well is looking at Manchester and looking at identifying a complete swimming community so that we get the ticket clerks, we get the teachers who are associated with the baths, we get the people who use the baths for entertainments, we get the matron, and we really dig into what that community looked like, what the differences in pay were, how long people stayed in their jobs, what the contracts were by looking at local authority data and so on. So it's and once we've done that with a number of different baths around the country, then we can start to think about whether there are specific differences in payment and working conditions and so on. Now, we've given 5 years to the project. That's how long it'll take, at least, I would have thought. Malcolm, you've got a question.
Thanks, Dave. The skeptic in this is that the separate spheres are broken only because women are employed as adjuncts to their husbands in these cases, which is how I heard the data. There may be more subtlety to it.
Oh, no, I think I was... If that was the only point of fissure, then that would be a poor one. It would, the fissures go beyond that. I'm using that purely as an example of a fissure.
So what I'm wondering is there much evidence in this data set of married women
I think if I've not got the data on this because I had to keep it at 20, but we've looked at women who are employed in a range of different situations, and how many of those were married or non-married. I would say if we took, for example, the marital status of clerks and cashiers, you can see categorically there that there's a very, very high percentage of them are single or widowed. The category we need to get into is this widowed category, because the next breakdown is how many of these people have not been married at all and how many of them have been widowed. Because I'm getting the impression that there's a significant number of widowed people, widowed women who are being employed in these categories, well, in that particular category, and as possibly as teachers, and certainly as laundry women. Laundry women is a really difficult category to get into. And they seem to be needing to go back to work after the death of a husband and so on. So there's so many different nuances here. And if I've given the impression that I'm basing the whole thing, the whole argument of fissures in the notion of separate spheres on the basis of the one example, I'm not. I'm using that as an example of this is the kind of spheres, fissures that occur really.
Last
Bob,
question
yeah.
of the day then, and the events go, Bob.
Blimey, right, pressure. Yeah, this data is fantastic. It really illuminates sort of the social history side of it. I guess I'm quite interested in the cultural history of this idea of the female swimmer or women involved in these professions. If they are part of these fissures of separate spheres, are they perceived as transgressive? I know there was sort of a new woman being depicted there in some of these slides. Is it a risque profession, or is it respectable?
It's equivalent to performing in the theatres in this particular instance, because essentially these women, the two types of women who get teaching classes are the women who teach classes primarily and put on entertainments with their pupils, and the reverse is women who primarily give entertainments and then use their fame and local renown or whatever to actually generate teaching classes. So the two are interlinked in that sense. But these particular women, and Caitlin touched on some of them yesterday, she touched particularly on Agnes in the middle, but probably a better example in what we're talking about is Laura, who invariably gave her position as a swimming teacher at the Baths at Eastbourne, but appeared regularly in entertainments all the way around the country. So they had a respectability from their teaching role because they were required in order to increase the number of women who were going to get involved in swimming, but they also had the same degree of respectability as being valued members of the theatre entertainment community. They're a fantastic population to look at. But I'm trying to get beyond that a little bit and as you say, to get more into the social history of the women working in bath situations. If we could do the laundry women, that would be fantastic. But laundry women could be people who went to your home and did laundry, so they never distinguished necessarily that they were at the baths. But if you divide the census into categories, if you list it in under the different number categories, laundry women are just huge. There's hundreds of thousands of laundry women. So I think that might be a step too far. But if we go to a baths community, I'm getting quite into this now. If we go to a specific baths community, we could identify the laundry women who are specifically employed at that baths, and that would be a way of actually bringing them down into, as I say, 5 years.
That is exactly 4:40, which is the time that the programme says it finishes. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.